My dad shoved me through the glass door and called me a nothing. I smiled as blood trickled down my face. "You just lost everything," I said. That night I told the world who really owned their empire. And by morning their perfect life had completely fallen apart. The sound of shattering glass still echoes in my ears, not just from the door my father shoved me through that night, but from the moment his perfect empire began to crumble around him. I was Audrey Lancaster, 28 years old, covered in blood, and my father had just called me worthless. But as I smiled up at him from the floor, surrounded by glittering shards, I whispered back, "You just lost everything." And I meant every single word. But to truly understand that night, we have to go back. Way back. My story, our family's story, it began long before those glittering shards on the marble floor. I was born into a world of incredible privilege, the only child of Harold and Grace Lancaster. My father, Harold, he was the CEO of Lancaster Technologies, a medical device company my grandfather, William, had started from his garage 40 years earlier. By the time I came along, we weren't just well off. We lived in a sprawling 20,000 square foot estate, overlooking the vast, sparkling Pacific. My earliest memories aren't of fancy toys, though there were plenty. No, they're of sitting on my grandfather's knee. He'd explain how the medical devices we made, they saved lives. "Audrey," he'd say, his eyes crinkling with such warmth, "one day all of this will be yours to protect. Remember, business is about more than just profit. It's about purpose." And then there was my mother, Grace. She truly was the heart of our family. She donated millions to children's hospitals, but more importantly, she insisted I understood that our privilege came with a profound responsibility. Every single Christmas, without fail, she'd take me to deliver gifts to children in those very hospitals. "Look them in the eyes, Audrey," she taught me. "Everyone deserves dignity. Every single person." But then everything shattered for the first time. I was just 12 years old when my mom, my beautiful, kind mother, was diagnosed with aggressive pancreatic cancer. 3 months. That's all we had. 3 agonizing months, and then she was gone. My father, he retreated. Completely. Buried himself in his work, leaving me, a grieving child, to navigate that crushing loss all alone. I remember sitting in her closet, just breathing in the fading scent of her perfume, desperately trying to conjure the sound of her laugh, the warmth of her hugs. It felt like I was losing her all over again, every single day. And then, just 11 months after her funeral, 11 months, my father introduced me to Stephanie. 6 weeks later, they were married. 6 weeks. She was 20 years younger than him, with these perfectly manicured nails that would dig into my shoulder when she'd hug me for photos, all while cooing, "We are going to be such good friends, Audrey darling." It was a performance even then. 2 days later, her 17-year-old son, Douglas, moved in. Handsome, charming, and he immediately, instantly, became the absolute center of my father's universe. What started as just showing him the ropes of the business quickly escalated. Douglas was being groomed as the heir apparent. I, the actual daughter, the one my grandfather had spoken to about purpose and legacy, I was relegated to the background, a forgotten figure in our perfect family photos. But here's the thing about being overlooked. It can either crush you or fuel you. For me, it was fuel. I excelled academically, professionally. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned my business degree from Stanford with highest honors, and had my MBA by 23. Meanwhile, Douglas was just barely struggling through a business degree at some local university. While he was doing that, I was in labs, I was in design, I was developing patents that would eventually become cornerstone products for Lancaster Technologies. My grandfather, William, he had always seen something in me. Before his death, when I was 18, he would sneak me into board meetings. "Watch how they negotiate," he'd whisper. "Notice who speaks, and more importantly, who * listens star." The other board members, they'd just smile, indulging old William and his little shadow. They had no idea I was absorbing every single word, every nuance. One of those board members, Victor Chan, he became my mentor after my grandfather passed. When I finished my MBA, it was Victor who helped me secure a position at a competing firm. He said, "Audrey, you need to learn this industry from all angles, just as your grandfather would have wanted. Your father, he needs to see your value from the outside. Sometimes family. Sometimes they just can't recognize the talent right in front of them." And Victor, he was absolutely right. So I spent 4 years out there proving myself. I built my reputation, separate from the Lancaster name, on the back of genuine innovation. Trade journals featured my work. Competitors were actively trying to poach me. I was making a name for Audrey Lancaster. All this time back at Lancaster Technologies, Douglas was being given more and more authority. And what did he do with it? Multiple failed product launches. Costly disasters. You know, Eleanor Wright, she was my grandfather's former assistant, and she still worked at the company. She was my eyes and ears. She'd call me, her voice always a little strained, saying things like, "Audrey, your father approved another $3 million for Douglas's pet project today. The board is getting nervous, but no one wants to challenge Harold directly." It was infuriating. My grandfather's company, being bled dry by incompetence and blind favoritism. When I turned 27, I knew it was time. I had to go back. Lancaster Technologies, the company my grandfather built with such integrity, was showing a concerning pattern of declining innovation and honestly losing market share. My father, predictably, was reluctant. He grudgingly offered me a position as Special Projects Manager. No team, a tiny office in the basement. When I dared to question the pathetic title, he just scoffed. Be grateful, Audrey. Most people would kill for a foot in the door here. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that I had spent years preparing for this exact moment. I had studied every single aspect of that business. I understood our products, our market, our history better than anyone, maybe even better than my grandfather himself at that point. And most importantly, I had begun to suspect that something was profoundly, deeply wrong with the company's finances. So I took the job. I accepted it with a smile. Thank you for the opportunity, Dad, I said, watching his surprise at my easy acquiescence. I will not disappoint you. That, I realized later, was the last promise I would ever keep to him. My first 6 months back were a masterclass in playing the long game. I kept my head down, worked longer hours than anyone, and systematically soaked up every single detail of the company's current operations. That basement office of mine? It became my war room, my command center, walls covered with product timelines, market analysis charts, organizational hierarchies. If people thought I was just some overachiever trying to prove herself, all the better. Meanwhile, our critical cardiovascular device division was in serious trouble. Sales had plummeted 30% over 2 years. A major hospital chain was threatening to jump ship to a competitor. I spent weekends, nights poring over patient outcomes, talking to doctors, dissecting competitor products, and the solution became blindingly clear. Our devices, while reliable, hadn't evolved with new, minimally invasive surgical techniques. So I designed a prototype. After relentless testing and refinement, I presented the concept to the division head. He was impressed, genuinely impressed, enough to allocate resources for development. Within 4 months, we had a working prototype that surgeons absolutely raved about in initial trials. This was it. The morning of the quarterly board meeting, I was buzzing, ready to present our solution, the projected revenue recovery, the future. But when I walked into the boardroom, there he was. My father. Already presenting my work. My slides. My research. My prototype right there in his hands. As I have been directing the team, he said so smoothly, so easily. We have developed a solution to the cardiovascular division challenges. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway. Board members nodded, taking notes, utterly convinced. Victor, my mentor, caught my eye, a slight frown on his face, but he said nothing. When my father finished, applause filled the room. Then he finally acknowledged me. Audrey, nice of you to join us. Take a seat if you can find one. The only empty chair was in the farthest corner. I sat there, a professional smile plastered on my face, while inside pure unadulterated rage burned through me. After the meeting, I confronted him in his office. Dad, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Those were my designs, my research, my prototype. He barely looked up from his computer. You work for Lancaster Technologies, Audrey. Everything you develop belongs to the company. To me. But I deserve credit for my work. I insisted. He finally looked at me, irritation flashing in his eyes. You know what you deserve, Audrey? To be grateful. I gave you any position here at all. Douglas would have solved the cardiovascular problem eventually anyway, probably in time for our largest client to walk away. His face hardened. Go back to your little projects, Audrey. The adults are running the business. And then the ultimate slap in the face. The very next week, company-wide emails went out, announcing Douglas's promotion to Executive Vice President of Product Development. They cited his innovative solution to the cardiovascular division crisis as evidence of his outstanding leadership. My name? Nowhere. It was a complete gut punch. That very night, still reeling from the public humiliation, I got a call from Eleanor. Audrey, are you sitting down? She asked, her voice hushed. My heart pounded. What happened, Eleanor? I was cleaning out some old storage files, she began, and I found something you need to see. It's about your grandfather's will. We met at a discreet coffee shop, 3 blocks from the office the very next day. Eleanor slipped a manila envelope across the table. These are copies, she said. I put the originals back exactly where I found them. Inside, my hands trembling, was a draft of my grandfather's will, dated just 2 months before his death. And there it was in black and white. It explicitly stated that his controlling shares of Lancaster Technologies were to be held in trust until I turned 30, at which point they would transfer directly to me. This was never executed. I whispered, flipping through the pages, my voice barely audible. The will that went through probate, it left everything to my father. Eleanor just nodded, grim-faced. There's more, Audrey. Keep reading. The envelope also contained a series of damning emails between my father and the family attorney, dated just days after my grandfather's death. They discussed modifications to the will before filing it, ensuring continuity of leadership without complications. He changed the will, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. It appears so, Eleanor confirmed. And that's not all. I've been noticing inconsistencies in the company's financial reports. Small enough to miss if you're not looking closely, but they've been growing. For years. The very next day, I ran into Stephanie in the executive wing. She stopped me, a perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Audrey, darling, she cooed. We haven't had a proper chat in ages. Lunch this week. I was curious certainly about her sudden interest. So I agreed. We met at this incredibly exclusive downtown restaurant, where she ordered $100 bottle of wine before noon. I just worry about you, she said, peering at me over her glass. All work and no social life. At your age I was already married. I told her. I'm focused on my career. Yes, she countered. But is it making you happy? You keep pushing for recognition, and your father just cannot give it to you. I slowly set down my fork. Cannot or will not? Her smile tightened just a fraction. Harold built this company into what it is today. It pains him to see you constantly challenging his decisions. Douglas, he knows how to support your father, rather than compete with him. Is that what you think I'm doing? I asked. Competing. Darling, she leaned forward, her voice dropping conspiratorially. We both know you've always wanted what Harold built, but some things just aren't meant to be. Perhaps if you found fulfillment elsewhere, you wouldn't need to prove yourself here. In that exact moment her mask completely slipped. I saw it all. The cold, calculating eyes of a protective mother, absolutely determined to ensure her son's inheritance. I just smiled pleasantly. Thank you for your concern, Stephanie. I'll give it some thought. As we parted ways she added with a saccharine sweetness that made my skin crawl. Your father is under tremendous pressure, Audrey. Try not to add to his burden with unrealistic expectations. Oh, I understood her expectations all right. That very afternoon, armed with Eleanor's revelations and Stephanie's thinly veiled threats, I started compiling a list of potential allies within the company. There were division heads who had genuinely praised my work, engineers who respected my technical knowledge, and a lot of administrative staff who had been there since my grandfather's time. I knew I'd need every single one of them if my darkest suspicions proved correct. My most surprising ally emerged about 2 weeks later, during a product safety review. Jackson Wright, a sharp lawyer recently hired into the legal department, he questioned some contract language that seemed, shall we say, deliberately designed to obscure liability. We ended up working late, ordering takeout, just revising document after document. This isn't my first rodeo with vague safety language, he said, loosening his tie. My last firm specialized in corporate malfeasance cases. Defending the corporations? I asked, my voice casual. Sometimes, he replied, holding my gaze. And sometimes helping whistleblowers. He studied me for a moment. The cardiovascular device modifications, those were yours, weren't they? Not Douglas's. I stiffened, my guard instantly up. What makes you say that? The technical language in the specifications, he said. Douglas can barely explain how the devices work in layman's terms, let alone articulate the engineering principles behind them. I said nothing, but Jackson just nodded, as if my silence was all the confirmation he needed. Corporate families are complicated, he murmured. I've seen how they can rot from the inside. Over the next several weeks, I began noticing patterns in the company finances that didn't just disturb me, they chilled me to the bone. Research funds allocated to projects that produced absolutely zero results. Consulting fees paid to companies that seemed to exist only on paper. Offshore accounts receiving regular transfers for international market development in countries where we had absolutely no presence. Each discovery was a terrifying piece of a puzzle I wasn't yet ready to assemble. But the picture that was emerging, it looked increasingly like systematic fraud, years in the making, with my own father right at its rotten, festering center. I needed more evidence. A lot more. All the while I kept producing exceptional work, subtly building my internal reputation, all while appearing to accept my limited, overlooked role. Douglas of course took credit for 2 more of my innovations. My father predictably denied my requests for a team for resources. Stephanie hosted lavish parties, making sure I was seated far, far away from any potential networking opportunities. But I was patient. And I was watching. The truth was slowly, agonizingly coming into focus, one betrayal at a time. 6 months after I returned to Lancaster Technologies, the company hosted its annual charity gala. This was Stephanie's pride and joy. A $500,000 spectacle, designed to generate donations for children's medical research? Sure. But mostly to generate glowing press coverage for the company. The grand ballroom of the city's most exclusive hotel was packed executives, board members, major clients, local politicians. I wore a simple black gown, elegant, understated. Douglas swaggered in with his date, a model whose name he kept forgetting probably. My father and Stephanie made their grand entrance a full 30 minutes late, just to ensure all eyes were on them. From my table at the periphery, I watched their performance of The Perfect Family. They do put on quite a show, Victor murmured beside me. He was one of the few board members who had dared to question my father's recent decisions, and he'd found himself increasingly marginalized for it. The Lancaster legacy on full display, I replied, sipping my champagne, the bitterness a tangible taste. Not the full legacy, Victor said meaningfully. Your grandfather would have handled things differently. Midway through dinner I excused myself, pretending to head to the restroom. But instead, I slipped into a service corridor and made my way to the hotel's business center. Using the access code Eleanor had provided me, I logged into the Lancaster Technology secure server. For the next 10, maybe 20 minutes, my hands trembled as I downloaded financial document after financial document from restricted folders. Report after report filled the screen, detailing how company funds had been diverted through a complex web of subsidiaries, research budgets manipulated, tax documents altered. The irregularities I'd noticed? They were just the very tip of an iceberg. This was systematic fraud spanning years. And then just as I was about to log out, I found it. One more folder, ominously labeled William Estate. Inside was the smoking gun, the original version of my grandfather's will, exactly as Eleanor had described. It left the controlling interest in the company to me upon turning 30, and right alongside it, documentation meticulously detailed of how it had been altered after his death. My father had stolen my inheritance. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely transfer everything to an encrypted drive. I composed myself, returning to the gala, my expression carefully neutral despite the frantic thundering of my heart. Later, when Douglas, a little drunk, clinked his glass to make an impromptu speech about continuing the Lancaster legacy of innovation, I applauded politely, all while mentally calculating how many federal laws my father had just broken. The evening concluded with my father announcing a new children's hospital wing, proudly named after Stephanie. The irony, the sheer burning injustice was unbearable. My mother had dedicated her entire life to those hospitals. Now, Stephanie was literally putting her name on that legacy too. It was a complete desecration. As the gala guests started to depart, my father, as usual, summoned his key executives to our home for late-night strategy discussions. These after-parties were infamous for being where the real business decisions were made, over ridiculously expensive scotch. For once, I was actually included, probably because excluding the only actual Lancaster at the founding family's table would have looked odd to the clients still in attendance. Our sprawling family estate was lit up like a beacon as cars pulled into the circular driveway. Staff bustled about, taking coats, serving drinks in the grand main hall. I watched my father hold court, board members and executives hanging on his every word, laughing at his jokes, seeking his approval. The sheer, intoxicating power he wielded over them, it was sickening. Around midnight, as the discussions broke into smaller groups, I quietly slipped away, making my way to my father's home office. I needed one final piece of evidence, hard copies of bank statements, proof of his personal benefit from the corporate fraud. I knew he'd keep them here. He was too cautious, too paranoid, to leave absolutely everything in digital form. I was photographing documents with my phone, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, when the door suddenly opened. My father stood there, a glass of scotch in his hand, his expression shifting from surprise to instant, searing anger. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I straightened up, my phone slipping into my pocket, forcing myself to appear calm. "Just looking for that Anderson proposal you mentioned earlier, Dad." "In my desk drawers?" he scoffed, his eyes narrowing. "Try again." We stood there, staring at each other, and in that moment, the years of pretense between us finally irrevocably dropped away. I thought of all the times I had desperately sought his approval, his recognition, all the brilliant work I had done for his company, all the lies he had told, the legacy he'd corrupted. "I know about grandfather's will," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The real one." Color drained from his face, leaving him ashen. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he stammered, trying to regain his composure. "I know about the offshore accounts," I continued, pressing on, "the diverted research funds, the tax fraud." He carefully set his glass down. "You think you understand business, Audrey? At your age? Sometimes complex strategies just look questionable to inexperienced eyes. Fraud looks like fraud to federal prosecutors, Dad." His expression hardened, his jaw clenching. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm telling you," I said, holding his gaze. "I know the truth about everything, including how you built your precious empire on stolen inheritance and criminal activity. You ungrateful little." He stopped, himself visibly struggling to rein in his explosive anger. "Everything I did, Audrey, was to build this company, to create a legacy." "A legacy," I countered. "You stole from me. You." He laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "You could never handle what I've built. You're too much like your mother. Soft. Sentimental. This company needs a strong leader. Like Douglas." I shot back, the words laced with pure venom. "The alcoholic who takes credit for other people's work?" His face flushed a dark, dangerous red. "At least he understands loyalty." "Is that what you call it?" I asked, my voice rising. "I call it enabling criminal behavior." He stepped toward me, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You will not threaten this family. Everything you have I gave you. No, I finally shouted. Everything I should have had you took from me. Something truly snapped in his eyes then. You are nothing without the Lancaster name, Audrey. Nothing. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging painfully into my skin. I yanked away, but his rage was fully unleashed now. As I turned to leave, he shoved me hard toward the door. The heavy wooden door, instead of opening, held firm. My momentum carried me forward, and I crashed straight through the glass panel beside it. The sound was deafening. A sickening explosion. Sharp, searing pain exploded across my back and arms as glittering shards rained down around me. I landed hard on the hallway floor, stunned, disoriented. Warm wetness spread across my face. Blood. Silence. A suffocating, horrified silence fell over the house as party guests turned, one by one, to stare. Stephanie appeared in the living room doorway, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. Douglas stood behind her, looking utterly bewildered. My father, he stood frozen in the doorway of his office, the full horrifying realization of what he had just done slowly dawning on his face. For that fleeting moment, all illusions of power stripped away by that single violent act, he looked exactly like what he was. A frightened, pathetic old man. I touched my face, my fingers coming away slick and red, but strangely I felt calm. I looked up at him, blood trickling down my cheek, and a slow, cold smile spread across my lips. You just lost everything, I whispered, my voice clear. Stephanie, ever the performer, rushed forward, feigning concern for the watching guests. Oh, she tripped, she announced loudly. Too much champagne. Let's get you cleaned up, Audrey. But no one moved. No one offered to help me stand. I rose slowly, deliberately, fragments of glass tinkling from my dress, blood dripping onto the pristine marble floor. Douglas stepped forward, perhaps to guide me away from the shocked onlookers, but I shook my head. Don't touch me, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. None of you touch me. I walked straight through the stunned crowd, head held high, feeling the blood drying on my skin, the tiny glass shards clinging to my clothes. Behind me, I heard my father's panicked instructions for guests to leave, Stephanie's nervous, forced laughter, Douglas offering to drive someone home. In my own bathroom, I examined the damage. Dozens of small cuts crisscrossing my arms and back. A deeper gash ran along my hairline, the source of most of the blood. As I carefully removed the glass fragments and disinfected the wounds, my decision solidified. Years of theft, fraud, lies, manipulation. All of it would end tonight. I had everything I needed now, including witnesses to my father's violence. The carefully constructed facade of Lancaster family perfection had shattered, completely, along with that glass door. By morning the empire would follow. I swore it. I didn't sleep that night. Not a wink. The physical pain from dozens of cuts kept me acutely aware, but it was the pure white-hot adrenaline and an ironclad resolve that truly kept exhaustion at bay. After carefully treating the worst of my injuries, I changed into practical clothes, and then I began executing the plan I had been mentally refining for months. First, I backed up every single piece of evidence I had gathered to 3 separate, secure locations. 1 cloud server, 1 physical drive hidden deep in my apartment, and 1 set of documents I had already mailed to Jackson's personal address days earlier, just as insurance. If anything happened to me, those instructions would ensure everything reached the proper authorities. As I worked, memories unbidden and sharp surfaced. My grandfather showing me the very first medical device he ever patented, his eyes full of hope. My mother's gentle, unwavering guidance. The cold, stark moment I realized my father saw me not as his daughter, but as competition. The slow, painful erosion of my place in my own family. At 3 in the morning my phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Are you all right? Hearing concerning rumors about an incident at the gala. I responded briefly. I am fine. Be ready tomorrow. Everything changes. She replied immediately. Whatever you need. Eleanor, she had been fiercely loyal to my grandfather for 30 years. When he died, she stayed at Lancaster Technologies, partly out of loyalty to his memory, but mostly, I now suspected, to keep a quiet, watchful eye on my father. She'd seen the company warp under his leadership, witnessed the insidious shift from patient-focused innovation to profit-driven shortcuts. I remembered a conversation we'd had 6 months earlier, shortly after I returned. We were reviewing old product development files when she suddenly closed the folder. Your grandfather had a saying, Audrey, she told me. Never mistake the name on the building for ownership of what happens inside it. What did he mean? I'd asked. Lancaster Technologies, she'd explained, her voice firm. It belongs to the patients whose lives depend on our products. It belongs to the employees who dedicate their careers to its mission. It belongs to the principles of innovation and integrity. She fixed me with such a meaningful look. He didn't build this company for one person to treat as a personal kingdom. That conversation, it had stayed with me, reinforcing every single one of my growing suspicions about my father's reckless management. Now, as dawn began to paint the sky, I gathered the final pieces of my plan. At 4:30 in the morning I called Victor. He answered on the second ring, his voice surprisingly alert despite the hour. I saw what happened, he said without preamble. Are you injured? Nothing serious, Victor, I told him. But I need to meet with you before the markets open. I've discovered significant irregularities in the company finances. Criminal irregularities. There was a long pause. I've had concerns for some time, he admitted. Your father has been blocking full financial reviews. I have the evidence, Victor, I said. All of it. Another pause, shorter this time. My home office. 6 a.m. Bring everything. Next, I contacted 3 other board members, ones I genuinely believed would prioritize the company's integrity over any misguided loyalty to my father. Brief, careful messages, requesting urgent meetings regarding material financial concerns. 2 of them responded immediately, agreeing to conference calls later that morning. At 5:15 a.m., I reached out to Jackson. Again, despite the hour, he answered promptly. I need legal counsel, Jackson, I said, unofficially before I take official action. Is this about what I think it is? He asked, his voice gravely serious. Yes, I confirmed, and more. There was an incident last night. I heard whispers, he said. How badly are you hurt? I'll live. Can you meet me at my apartment in 30 minutes? It's secure, and I have what you might need. Jackson, he had serious experience with corporate whistleblower cases. Before joining Lancaster Technologies, he'd helped expose similar fraud at 2 other major companies. He'd actually been hired during a period when my father was away, his resume quietly approved by the head of legal, who had since been conveniently pushed into early retirement. When I arrived at his apartment, he took one look at my face, the bandage at my hairline, the faint smudges of blood I'd missed, and wordlessly poured me a cup of coffee. Start from the beginning, he said, pulling out a legal pad. Everything you found, and everything that happened last night. For 45 intense minutes, I laid out every piece of evidence. The financial discrepancies, the altered will, the pattern of control and isolation, and finally, the violent culmination at the gala after-party. You have enough for the SEC, the IRS, and likely criminal charges, he confirmed, reviewing my meticulous documentation. But you need to consider what this really means, Audrey. Going public. It burns everything to the ground. The company's stock will plummet. Jobs could be lost. Your family name will be tarnished, permanently. I've considered all of that, Jackson, I replied, my voice unwavering. But I also considered what happens if this continues. Patient safety compromised for profit. Employees unwittingly working for a criminal enterprise. My grandfather's legacy corrupted beyond all recognition. Jackson studied me for a long moment. There's no halfway option here. Once you pull this trigger, you cannot take it back. I know. And you're ready for the personal cost? He pressed. Your father will likely face prison. Your relationship with your family. Destroyed forever. I touched the bandage on my forehead, feeling the faint tender sting of the cut beneath. That relationship was destroyed long ago, Jackson. I just didn't want to admit it. Jackson nodded slowly. Then let's make sure this is done right. Maximum impact, minimum legal exposure for you. Together with surgical precision, we crafted communications for each recipient. The SEC would receive comprehensive financial records. The board members would get summary evidence and emergency protocols for company stabilization. Select journalists would receive carefully curated information packages, strategically timed for release after official investigations began. What about your claim to the controlling interest? Jackson asked, referring to the altered will. One battle at a time, I said. First, we stop the criminal activity. Then we can address ownership through proper legal channels. By 9 a.m., I had met with Victor and another board member, Patricia Alvarez. Both were utterly ashen-faced after reviewing my evidence. We will need to call an emergency board meeting, Victor stated, his voice tight. Suspend Harold pending investigation. He will fight it, Patricia warned, her eyes wide. Let him, I replied, a cold certainty in my voice. The evidence speaks for itself. At 10 a.m., I returned to my apartment to make final preparations. My phone was a glowing testament to the chaos I was unleashing. 23 missed calls from my father, 12 from Stephanie, 9 from Douglas. I ignored them all. Instead, I called 3 journalists renowned for their thorough reporting on corporate malfeasance. Each conversation was brief, professional, ending with scheduled delivery of documentation later that day. As noon approached, I felt a flicker of hesitation. Was I truly ready to destroy my family in such a public, devastating way? Then I remembered my grandfather's unwavering integrity, my mother's profound compassion, the very values they had instilled in me that had been so utterly betrayed by my father's greed. I remembered the sickening feeling of glass shattering against my skin, the look in my father's eyes, not of remorse but of pure, unleashed rage that I had dared to provoke him into revealing his true, ugly nature. I made one final call to Eleanor. It's happening today, I told her. Be prepared for chaos. I have been prepared for years, Audrey, she replied, her voice remarkably steady. Your grandfather would be proud. At 12:30 p.m., I sent the first batch of evidence to the SEC through their whistleblower portal. At 12:45, I emailed comprehensive documentation to the 7 board members I trusted. At 1 p.m., I provided secure access to selected documents to the journalists. Then I waited. I knew with every fiber of my being that the carefully constructed empire of lies was about to collapse. The first domino fell at 2:17 p.m. My phone rang. It was Victor. "The SEC has contacted legal," he said, no preamble, no greeting. "They're requesting all financial records be preserved immediately. Harold is being summoned to an emergency board meeting at 4. Has he responded?" I asked, my voice tight. "Not yet. His assistant says he's in meetings off-site." I knew exactly what that meant. My father was in full-blown damage control mode, frantically trying to identify the source of the leak. He wouldn't suspect me, not yet. He'd believe his display of power last night had effectively put me back in my place. "Keep me informed, Victor," I told him. "And thank you for doing the right thing." "This company," he replied, his voice heavy. "It was your grandfather's life's work. Someone needs to save it from your father." At 3:30 p.m., Jackson texted me. "Federal agents just entered the building. Executive floor in lockdown. Files being secured." Things were moving even faster than I had anticipated. I'd expected at least a full day before federal involvement became so visible. Clearly, someone on the board, maybe Victor, had made additional calls, perhaps to the FBI or the Department of Justice itself. My phone rang again. "Douglas." For the 10th time. I declined the call. By 4 p.m., I realized I needed to retrieve the final pieces of evidence from my father's home. With everyone focused on the corporate headquarters, the family estate would likely be empty. I took a rideshare rather than my own car to avoid any recognition, and had the driver drop me 2 blocks away. The house was eerily quiet as I approached. Staff would be minimal on a weekday afternoon. I used my key to enter through the side door, near the kitchen, listening carefully for any movement. Hearing nothing, I made my way to my father's home office. The glass door had been hastily boarded up with plywood, a crude, stark reminder of the night before. Dried blood still stained the pristine marble floor where I had fallen. I stepped carefully around it and entered the office. My father's desk appeared untouched. I went directly to the hidden safe behind the hunting painting. Another of my grandfather's traditions my father had co-opted without ever truly understanding its significance. The combination? My grandfather's birthday. My father had kept it, perhaps out of sentimentality, or more likely, sheer laziness. Inside the safe, I found exactly what I was looking for. The original copy of my grandfather's will, complete with handwritten notes from my father indicating the changes to be made. Next to it sat a small leather journal, my grandfather's, documenting his true intentions for the company's succession. And beside that, account information for private offshore holdings, where company funds had been so meticulously diverted. I photographed everything, then carefully replaced the items, except for the journal. That I slipped into my bag. It wasn't technically evidence of a crime, but it was my birthright, a tangible piece of my grandfather's true wishes. As I closed the safe and replaced the painting, I heard it. A door closing somewhere in the house. Footsteps approaching down the hallway. I quickly moved behind the large desk, crouching out of sight. The office door opened. From my hiding place, I could see Douglas's expensive shoes step inside. He moved to the desk, began opening drawers, frantically shuffling through papers. His movements were erratic, panicked. "Where is it?" he muttered. Where would he keep it? He was looking for something specific, clearly incriminating evidence. My father must have sent him to clear out anything damaging before authorities thought to search the house. Douglas moved toward the safe. As he shifted the painting, I realized I needed to leave. Now, while he was distracted, fumbling with the safe combination, I slowly edged toward the door, staying low behind furniture, praying the old floorboards wouldn't creak. I had almost reached the doorway when his phone rang, startling us both. I froze, holding my breath as he answered. "Yes, I'm here now," he said, his voice tense. "Looking exactly where you said." "No, I haven't found it yet." "They what? When?" His voice rose in alarm. "How many agents?" "Jesus." "Yes, I understand." He ended the call and slammed his fist against the wall. Damn it. Whatever he just learned had clearly escalated the situation dramatically. As he turned back to the safe, I seized my opportunity, slipping out the door, moving like a ghost, staying close to the wall to avoid those creaking floorboards I remembered from childhood. I made it to the side door and out of the house undetected. Once clear of the property, I checked my phone. 5 missed calls from Eleanor and a text. FBI at headquarters. Complete lockdown. Harold being questioned. It was all happening even faster than I had anticipated. I called Eleanor from a coffee shop, 2 miles from the estate. "What's the situation?" I asked when she answered. "Agents everywhere," she replied, her voice hushed, strained. "They arrived with warrants for financial records going back 7 years. Harold is in the conference room with federal agents and company attorneys." Stephanie tried to leave the building, but she was escorted back inside. She paused. And the board's emergency session? It's in progress. Victor is leading. They're discussing a temporary leadership structure. Pending investigation. Where are you now? I asked, processing everything. Records department. They've asked us to facilitate document access. Stay safe, Eleanor, I told her. This is going to get uglier before it improves. My next call was to Jackson. I need to know if I should come in or stay away. Stay away, he advised immediately. The board knows you're the whistleblower, but it's better if you're not physically present while federal agents are conducting initial interviews. I've already informed select agents that you are available to provide testimony when needed. Has my father figured it out yet? I asked, dread coiling in my stomach. Jackson's voice was grim. Yes, Audrey. When agents mentioned the altered will, he apparently shouted something about you before his attorney managed to shut him down. At 6 p.m., I checked into a hotel under a pseudonym, just as Jackson had advised. From this secure, anonymous location, I began monitoring developments through secure communications with my allies inside the company. The evening news ran the first stories. Federal investigation at Lancaster Technologies. Medical device giant facing fraud allegations. Lancaster CEO under investigation. None mentioned me specifically yet, but I knew that would come. I had provided the journalists with enough background that the full story would emerge in waves, each one more damaging than the last. At 9:12 p.m. my father finally called again. Against my better judgment, I answered. Why? His voice was hoarse, barely recognizable, ragged with desperation. You know why, I replied, my voice steady, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. Do you have any idea what you've done? The company won't survive this. The company, I countered, will survive. Without the fraud. Without the corruption. He was silent for a long moment. Then with a chilling cold fury he spat. You planned this. All of it. Coming back to the company, gaining access. I came back to save what grandfather built. I interrupted. I gave you chances to do the right thing. You're destroying your own family. This company supports hundreds of employees. Patients depend on our products. He shouted, trying to deflect. Don't you dare pretend this is about employees or patients. I cut him off. This is about what you stole from the company, from shareholders, from me. Then his voice shifted, turned pleading, a tone I had never heard from him before. Audrey, please. Whatever you think I've done, we can resolve this privately, as a family. We stopped being a family, Dad, I said, the words heavy with finality. The moment you decided I was a threat rather than your daughter. I paused, then added, letting the words hang in the air. Or perhaps it was when you altered grandfather's will to disinherit me. Silence. A long, agonizing silence on the other end. Then a ragged gasp. You can't prove that. I already have. It's all in the hands of authorities now. I will fight this, he growled, that brief vulnerability instantly replaced by raw, defiant rage. With every resource I have. Those resources, I said, are being frozen as we speak. I ended the call. And then I turned off my phone. The die was cast. My evidence was with the authorities, the board, and soon the entire public. There was no stopping what would come next. At the hotel room desk, I opened my laptop and reviewed one final email. It contained my formal statement to the board, requesting emergency appointment as interim CEO, based on my grandfather's documented intentions and my own undeniable qualifications. Victor had helped me draft it, believing as I did, that the company needed a Lancaster at the helm to weather the coming storm, but one untainted by the scandal. My finger hovered over the send button. Once sent, I would be volunteering to step directly into the eye of the hurricane, to take on the responsibility of saving a company on the verge of collapse, to face relentless public scrutiny and potential backlash. But then I thought of my grandfather's words. Business is about more than profit. It is about purpose. I took a deep breath, and I pressed send. My hotel room phone rang at 5:30 in the morning, jarring me from a fitful, adrenaline-fueled sleep. It was Victor. Turn on the news, he said, his voice clipped without preamble. I fumbled for the remote, flicking on the television. A somber news anchor was already mid-sentence. Federal agents executed search warrants at both Lancaster Technologies headquarters and the sprawling Lancaster family estate late into the night. Sources confirm CEO Harold Lancaster and Chief Financial Officer Martin Wells have been taken in for questioning. The screen flashed footage of my father, looking utterly broken, being escorted to a black SUV. Stephanie, her face ashen, followed behind, agents on either side. Douglas, notably, was absent from the footage. The board voted at 4 a.m., Victor continued. Harold has been suspended pending investigation. Wells terminated. Your appointment as interim CEO was approved by a narrow margin. I sat on the edge of the bed, stunned, even though I had set these very events in motion. When do they need me there? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. 9 a.m., he said. Board meeting to formalize the transition. Federal agents want to interview you at 11. Press conference tentatively scheduled for 2 p.m. The machine was in motion now. Unstoppable. I'll be there, I affirmed. After a quick shower, I dressed with careful consideration. A conservative navy suit, minimal jewelry, my hair pulled back strategically to partially conceal the bandage on my forehead. I needed to project stability, confidence, not appear as either a victim or a vindictive daughter. On the drive to headquarters, my phone buzzed continuously with messages and calls. The story had broken wide open overnight. 3 major business publications had already run detailed exposés on the financial fraud, citing anonymous whistleblowers and company insiders. One had even directly referenced the altered will, though thankfully without naming me specifically. The Lancaster Technologies parking lot was a chaotic scene, packed with news vans and reporters. Security personnel had to escort me through a side entrance to avoid the media gauntlet. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Employees huddled in small groups, conversations stopping abruptly, their eyes following me as I passed. Eleanor met me at the executive elevator. "They know it was you," she said quietly, her eyes full of concern. "Not officially, but word has spread. How are the employees taking it?" I asked. Shocked, confused, afraid for their jobs, but also, she hesitated. "There's a definite relief among some. Your father's management style had become increasingly erratic. People have been walking on eggshells for months." The executive floor itself was eerily quiet, federal agents having commandeered several offices, boxes of documents stacked everywhere. Victor waited for me in what had been my father's office, now completely stripped of his imposing personal items. "The initial financial assessment is worse than we thought, Audrey," he said after closing the door. "The fraud extends far beyond what even your evidence showed. Wells, the CFO, has apparently been cooperating with authorities since midnight, implicating your father in exchange for leniency." I nodded, unsurprised, a grim satisfaction coiling in my gut. "The company's status?" I asked. "Stock trading was halted before market open. We expect a 30 to 40% drop when it resumes. Major hospital chains are calling for reassurance about supply continuity. The FDA has requested emergency meetings regarding product safety. This was my greatest, deepest concern. Patient lives could be at risk. Any indication of actual safety issues?" I pressed. "Initial review suggests the fraud was financial, not product-related," he replied. "Your father may have been corrupt, but he wasn't stupid enough to risk liability for defective medical devices. Small comfort but critical." We spent the next hour preparing for the board meeting, reviewing talking points and transition plans. At 8:45 my phone rang. "Stephanie." Against my better judgment, I answered. "How could you?" she hissed, her voice raw, thick with either tears or pure rage. "Your own father." "He made his choices," I replied evenly. "Years of them. They arrested him in front of everyone. Do you have any idea what this is doing to Douglas? To me. Where is Douglas, by the way?" I asked, a cutting edge to my voice. "I noticed he wasn't with you and father last night." A pause. "He's dealing with this in his own way." Translation. "Likely drunk or hiding." "Stephanie," I said, "I have a board meeting to attend. Was there something specific you needed?" "You will regret this," she spat, her voice hardening, venomous. "When the dust settles, you will have nothing. And no one. Family is everything, Audrey." "That's exactly why I did this, Stephanie," I said. "For my real family. For what they built and what they believed in." I ended the call as Victor signaled it was time for the board meeting. The boardroom was a crucible, tense, divided between directors who had supported my appointment and those still fiercely loyal to my father. I entered, chin high, taking the seat at the head of the table that had been my father's for 2 decades. "Good morning," I began calmly. "I recognize this is an unprecedented situation for Lancaster Technologies. I want to assure each of you that my absolute priority is stabilizing the company, cooperating fully with all investigations, and ensuring the continued production of the life-saving devices our patients depend on." For the next hour, we meticulously addressed immediate concerns: communication strategies, leadership transition, regulatory compliance. I outlined a 90-day stabilization plan, emphasizing transparency and, crucially, accountability. By the meeting's end, even the most skeptical directors seemed cautiously supportive. At 11 a.m., I met with federal investigators. For 2 intense hours, I walked them through my meticulously gathered evidence, answered questions about company operations, and formally filed my whistleblower statement. They were particularly interested in the altered will and my father's elaborate methods of concealing financial transactions. "We will need you to testify if this goes to trial, Miss Lancaster," the lead investigator informed me. "I understand," I replied. "I am prepared to do whatever is necessary." The press conference at 2 p.m. was a tightly controlled spectacle. Standing at the podium with Victor and the board chairman flanking me, I faced dozens of cameras and a sea of reporters. Lancaster Technologies has a 50-year history of developing medical devices that save lives. I began, my voice clear and strong. That mission remains unchanged. While we address serious allegations regarding financial improprieties under previous leadership, our commitment to patients, healthcare providers, and ethical business practices stands firm. I took no questions about my father specifically, deflecting to the ongoing investigation. When asked about my new role, I emphasized my qualifications and my lifelong, deeply personal connection to the company's founding mission. As the press conference concluded, a reporter shouted, cutting through the final remarks, "Miss Lancaster, is it true you were physically assaulted by your father before reporting his crimes?" The entire room fell silent. The bandage on my forehead subtly covered suddenly felt conspicuously visible. I maintained unwavering eye contact with the reporter. "I will not be discussing family matters. This is about Lancaster Technologies, its employees, and the patients who depend on our products. Thank you." Back in the executive office, reports continued flooding in. The company stock had indeed plummeted 35% upon resuming trading. 3 executive vice presidents had resigned. Customers were demanding reassurances. Partners were invoking contract review clauses. Through it all, I maintained an outward composure I did not entirely feel, making decisions, directing resources, projecting confidence. By evening, patterns of support had thankfully emerged. Long-term employees rallied around the promise of renewed integrity. Industry partners who had known my grandfather expressed cautious optimism about my leadership. At 8 p.m., Eleanor brought me dinner at my desk along with an update. "Douglas has been located," she said. "He attempted to access sensitive servers before security removed him from the building. Jackson is handling the legal aspects." I nodded tiredly. "Any word on my father?" "Released on bail, but restricted from entering company property. The family estate has been designated a secondary crime scene. He and Stephanie are staying at their lake house." "And the employees?" Eleanor's expression softened. "Doing better than expected. There were initial shockwaves, but your afternoon address to staff helped considerably. People appreciate honesty after months of obvious gaslighting from previous leadership." Around 10 p.m., Jackson arrived with additional updates. "The federal case is expanding, Audrey. They found connections to tax evasion through those offshore accounts. The prosecutor's talking potential plea deals to avoid trial." "Will he take one?" I asked, knowing my father's immense pride. "His attorneys will push for it," Jackson replied. 15 to 20 years potential sentencing otherwise. The brutal reality of what I had set in motion hit me anew. My father, for all his flaws, facing prison in his 60s. A family shattered beyond repair. My own life forever altered. "Having second thoughts?" Jackson asked gently, reading my expression with an uncanny accuracy. "No," I said after a long moment, "just processing the scope of it all." "For what it's worth," he offered, his voice soft. "What you did, it took extraordinary courage. Many people suspected problems, but looked the other way for years. I thought of the glass shattering around me, the decades of manipulation and betrayal, the legacy so nearly destroyed by greed. It wasn't courage," I replied, looking out at the city lights. "It was necessity." By midnight, I finally left headquarters for my hotel. Security concerns made returning to my apartment inadvisable for now. As the car pulled away from the building, I saw the illuminated Lancaster Technologies sign, my family name glowing against the night sky. For the first time in years, it felt like it truly belonged to me again. Felt like mine. 6 months. 6 months after the night my father shoved me through that glass door, I stood at the podium during our quarterly investor meeting. The boardroom was packed, a sea of analysts and major shareholders, all eager to hear how Lancaster Technologies had, against all odds, weathered the storm. "The past 2 quarters have shown remarkable resilience," I began, gesturing to the projection behind me. "Stock values have recovered 60% from their lowest point. Our new, rigorously implemented ethical compliance framework has received widespread industry recognition. And most importantly, not a single patient has experienced any disruption in receiving our life-saving devices." The road to this moment had been nothing short of arduous. That first month after the revelations was pure chaos. 3 class action lawsuits from furious shareholders, FDA audits of every single production facility, employee uncertainty resulting in a 15% voluntary departure rate, and media scrutiny that dissected every agonizing aspect of the Lancaster family drama. But we pushed through. The criminal cases progressed swiftly. Martin Wells, the former CFO, accepted a plea deal in exchange for testimony. 3 other executives quickly followed suit. My father. He initially vowed to fight all charges, but as the evidence mounted, undeniable and crushing, and his former allies abandoned him one by one, his attorneys negotiated a complex agreement. Guilty pleas to tax evasion and securities fraud, in exchange for dismissal of the more serious charges. He received a 7-year sentence, eligible for parole after 4. The financial penalties were severe. The family estate, that monument to stolen legacy, was seized as partial restitution. I haven't spoken to him since his sentencing hearing, where he stared straight ahead, refusing to meet my eyes as I delivered my victim impact statement. Stephanie, ever the opportunist, filed for divorce 2 weeks after his conviction, skillfully negotiating her own settlement to avoid any charges of complicity. She moved to Arizona, launching a small skincare line that predictably, carefully avoided any mention of her Lancaster connection. Douglas faced minor charges related to attempting to destroy evidence. He received probation and community service, then promptly disappeared to Europe, occasionally surfacing in social media posts from yacht parties and ski resorts, funded by whatever resources he had managed to hide before the collapse. The company's transformation had been my absolute primary focus. We brought in forensic accountants to meticulously identify every last financial irregularity, established ironclad new compliance protocols, restructured the board to include medical ethics experts and, crucially, patient advocates. We redirected research priorities back to genuine innovation, not just cost-cutting. And most meaningfully, we established the Grace Lancaster Foundation, named for my mother, dedicated to providing medical devices to underserved communities globally. It was what she would have wanted. It was what my grandfather had truly envisioned for the company's broader purpose. Moving forward, I continued, addressing the investors. We are launching 3 new product lines, developed under our revised research protocols. Clinical trials show unprecedented effectiveness rates, and early adopter hospitals are reporting significant improvement in patient outcomes. Victor, now the revered chairman of the board, nodded approvingly from his seat. We had become true partners in rebuilding this legacy, his institutional knowledge complementing my vision for the future. Eleanor had accepted a well-deserved promotion to chief of staff, her unwavering loyalty finally properly rewarded. Jackson remained with the company through the transition, then accepted a position with the Justice Department's Corporate Fraud Division. We still maintained our friendship. Someone needs to catch the next Harold Lancaster before they do too much damage, he had explained, a wry smile on his face. After the investor meeting, I returned to my office, now completely redesigned to remove all traces of my father's imposing dark wood and hunting trophies. The space was open with glass walls, symbolizing the transparency I had brought to the company culture. The physical scars from that night had healed, though a faint line remained at my hairline, visible when I wore my hair up. The emotional landscape was of course far more complex. I had lost my family, yes, but I had reclaimed my heritage. The company now truly reflected my grandfather's vision and my mother's values. That evening, I visited my mother's grave for the first time in years. My father had always discouraged these visits, another insidious way of diminishing her influence and memory. I placed white roses, her favorite, against the headstone. "Mom," I said quietly, a tear finally escaping, "I think you would be proud, not of the scandal or the pain, but of rebuilding something worthy of your name." The wind rustled through the nearby trees, the only response, but somehow it was enough. My grandfather's journal had become a constant touchstone during the most difficult moments. One passage in particular had guided me through the darkest days of the transition. Business empires rise and fall, but integrity stands eternal. Lancaster Technologies must never value profit above purpose or power above people. If these principles are ever compromised, the company must be cleansed through truth, however painful that process might be. He had known. Somehow he had known that such a moment might come. Perhaps he had seen tendencies in my father that concerned him deeply, leading to his original intention to pass control directly to me. In the months since taking control, I had received hundreds of messages from employees, sharing how the cultural transformation had profoundly affected them. Engineers now empowered to prioritize safety improvements. Sales representatives relieved to promote products they genuinely believed in. Manufacturing staff proud of new quality standards. These messages, they meant more to me than the financial recovery, more than the restored stock price or any industry accolades. They represented the human impact of choosing truth over comfortable lies, of valuing integrity above family loyalty, when that loyalty demanded moral compromise. The path forward remained challenging, of course. Trust once broken rebuilt slowly. Some customers remained wary. Certain board members still occasionally questioned my experience. Media outlets sometimes revived the scandal for slow news days. But the foundation we had built was solid, now constructed on truth rather than deception. The Lancaster name was being redefined. One decision, one product, one patient outcome at a time. In quiet moments, I sometimes still wondered if my father, sitting in that prison cell, ever truly reflected on what he had lost. Not just his freedom or his immense wealth, but the opportunity to be part of something genuinely meaningful. To contribute to a legacy far greater than himself. To know the deep, quiet satisfaction of success achieved honorably. I had learned that some forms of betrayal simply cannot be forgiven, only accepted and moved beyond. That family is truly defined by values shared, not merely by blood connection. That the hardest choices are often, inevitably, the most necessary ones. And most importantly, I had learned that we are not defined by what others believe we deserve, but by what we know deep down to be right and what we have the courage, the sheer, unyielding courage to defend. If you've ever faced a moment where standing for truth meant losing something absolutely precious, I truly understand that struggle. Sometimes the greatest victory comes only after the most painful, heartbreaking sacrifice. Have you experienced a situation where you had to choose integrity over comfort, even when it cost you everything? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if this journey resonated with you, please subscribe for more real-life experiences of overcoming betrayal and finding strength in adversity. Thank you for listening, and remember this: your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. It's determined by what you know in your heart.